In this video, I'm going to take a look at a handful of examples from Chapter 6, Section 1, Exercise 1. This particular exercise is about translating, meaning that you're going to be given a sentence in English and you're required then to translate it into symbolic format. You'll notice that translating is heavily emphasized in the text. This exercise alone consists of some 50 different practice problems. Translating, however, will not be heavily emphasized in test number 1. In fact, it consists of a mere 5% of the points on test number 1. And after that first test, we'll essentially be done with translating for the quarter until we get at least to chapter number 8. So do you really need to go through all 50 examples? Probably not. How many should you go through? Enough so that you feel adequately prepared for the test. I would recommend going through 15, maybe 20 different problems. It's not something that should take too terribly much time, really. And the point is to start to notice the symbolic nature of language. You're going to start to recognize these symbols embedded into the way that we speak and therefore into the way that we think about the world. So this will be a quick little crash course, practice, and if you go through a sufficient number of examples, you should be ready for the test itself. Be sure, of course, to read through the lecture notes and check your answers as you continue to practice. The translating section on the test will actually be a little easier than exercise 1. Here you've got to come up with a translation from scratch. On the test, it'll be multiple choice, so you'll just have to identify the correct answer. So here are some tips to translate. Little Bob Dylan, hit the wrong button, sorry about that. To translate, 4 basic steps here, just to get a grasp on this. Not all steps will be necessary for any one problem, but step 1, just read through the sentence, get a sense of what's being said, get a sense of the flow, and that then leads directly to step number 2, try to identify the logical operators that are present. Step number 3, assign variables. And this obviously will be done on the test for you in that it's multiple choice. But for this exercise, just try to pick variables that stand to reason given the content. And then step number 4, you might have to identify the main op if it's a complex, longer sentence. And this, of course, would require using grouping symbols, parentheses, brackets, maybe eventually braces, though we won't take a look at anything nearly that complicated, and that certainly won't be required for the test. So let's jump in and we'll go through a handful of examples straight out of the book. So problem number 1, in fact, Cartier does not make cheap watches. Read through it, get a sense of the language. Cartier does not make cheap watches. Step 2, let's identify the operator or operators that are present. One operator is pretty clear. We've got negative language. We've got the standard translation for the tilde, not. So we've got a tilde in there. Step 3, assign variables. What variable would make sense given the content of this sentence? Cartier does not make cheap watches. C for Cartier seems to make sense, where C means Cartier makes cheap watches. That's not the case, so we've negated it. And the symbolic translation for problem 1 is just as simple as that. Not C. Cartier does not make cheap watches. Now, a quick little side note here, and hopefully this doesn't confuse anybody. If you find this to be confusing, go ahead and skip ahead, plug your ears, la la. The tilde can't be embedded into the definition of a variable. So I couldn't translate 1 as being C, where C means Cartier does not make cheap watches. Again, the tilde can't be embedded into the definition of a variable. It's got to be expressed symbolically, and the symbol used, again, obviously, is the tilde. So that's a real basic one. Here, of course, we don't have to worry about identifying the main op correctly. There's only one there. The main operator would be the tilde. Number 2, Arizona has a national park, but Nebraska does not. So read through it, get a sense of the language, start to pick out operators. Again, clearly, we've got negative language. We've got a not here at the end. Quick glance, any other operators. And it's not the standard translation, but is the dot. But is translated as the dot. The standard translation, of course, is and, but look at that shaded box in the text where it gives you all possible translations for the various operators, and but is listed next to the dot. So we've got two operators. In just this order, Arizona has a national park, but there's the dot, Nebraska does not. So we got dot, tilde. Step 3, let's plug in variables. A for Arizona, having a national park, N for Nebraska. And if we take this as it comes, Arizona A, but dot, N, Nebraska, and the tilde here would represent not. If we take it exactly as it comes, that would be our translation, A dot N tilde, but that of course is not a well-formed formula. The tilde, mind you, comes directly in front of that which it negates. So even that's the exact ordering of the language, symbolically it would need to be Arizona, but not Nebraska. The tilde is negating Nebraska having a national park. A dot tilde N. Arizona has a national park, but not Nebraska. Nebraska does not. Let's take a look at 5 and 6. And these two are good to compare and contrast. The language here is quite similar, but the translation is actually ever so slightly different. So number 5, first of all. If Chanel has a rosewood fragrance, then so does Lanvin. So read through it, get a sense. What operators? If, then, that's the standard translation for the horseshoe. Assign variables. C for Chanel, L for Lanvin. Number 5, C horseshoe L. That's a real basic one, but compare and contrast it now to number 6. Similar language, but ever so slightly different. Chanel has a rosewood fragrance if Lanvin does. So number 6, unlike number 5, doesn't say if then, it simply says if. And that's a subtle distinction to make, but it's an important one. If the language is if all by itself, not if then when symbolizing the statement, it actually has to be reversed. The antecedent and the consequent actually have to be reversed. So the consequent here becomes the antecedent. L for Lanvin, horseshoe, if is still the horseshoe, and now what was the antecedent becomes the consequent. So number 6 is L horseshoe C, whereas at number 5 it was actually C horseshoe L. This will be the last one that I cover. I would again highly recommend taking a look at a few additional problems in the text, checking your answers, letting me know if you have any questions. But a quick once over will suffice. It's 5% of test number 1. So 22. If Bill O'Reilly's spinning the news implies that Katie Couric charms her viewers, then Paula Zahn has sex appeal. So let's identify the operators here. Implies that. That's language indicating the horseshoe. And of course we've got if then in there as well. So we've got 2 horseshoes. Let's plug in our variables. B for Bill, O for O'Reilly, doesn't matter here. Bill and I are on a first name basis though. K for Katie, C for Couric, P for Paula, Z for Zahn, either way. In 22, unlike some of the earlier problems, we actually have to pick up that 4th step. Which one in 22 is the main operator? As written, it's not a well-formed formula. It's ambiguous. We can't tell if that horseshoe is the main operator, this horseshoe is the main operator. So how are we going to make that determination? And this is the trickiest thing about translating, I think, actually. Let's read through the sentence a few more times, perhaps, let it sink in. Which one's the main op? If Bill O'Reilly spinning the news implies that Katie Couric charms her viewers, then Paula Zahn has sex appeal. So this one's divvied up nicely for us. The comma identifies the main operator. Paula Zahn having sex appeal needs to be the consequent. So this first horseshoe, or this second horseshoe rather, that second horseshoe therefore would be the main operator, meaning that we have to put parentheses around the horseshoe K. Now I won't go through an example here. I would recommend checking out problems 41, 42, and 43 in the text. I know I said originally limit it to 15, 20 examples here, and that'll suffice. But go ahead and skip ahead. Take a look at 41, 42, and 43. For either sufficient condition or necessary condition, and read about this, use the acronym SUN. If it says both a sufficient and necessary condition, that's not the horseshoe at all. That would actually be translated as the triple bar, which the standard translation is if and only if. Again, let me know if you have any questions. If there's a problem that you're really stuck on, then send me a message and I can create your own video.